The U.S. Air Force and Navy SEALs just launched a surprise joint attack on a Venezuela cartel's floating fortress in the Caribbean. At first, it looked like the ship could withstand the attack, but what happened in the next 30 minutes shocked everyone watching and erased the cartel's strongest weapon at sea. At 10:32 a.m., U.S. Air Force surveillance aircraft identified a massive vessel moving through the southern Caribbean, close to international shipping lanes. The ship appeared to be a freighter, over 7,000 tons in weight, with cargo containers stacked on its deck. To anyone else, it looked like a normal cargo run, but U.S. intelligence had been tracking the ship for weeks. It wasn't just a freighter. Inside its hull was a floating cartel fortress built by the Tren de Aragua network, reinforced with hidden weapons, armored compartments, and an onboard militia of over 150 armed fighters. It carried not only drugs, but also millions in cartel cash, as well as civilian hostages forced to work under brutal conditions. Washington declared it a direct threat to regional stability. The operation was a joint strike between U.S. Air Force precision units and Navy SEALs. The plan was simple: overwhelm the ship's defenses with drone strikes, cripple its command deck, and then insert SEAL teams to capture it from the inside. Failure was not an option. This vessel wasn't just transporting drugs. It carried more than 300 tons of chemical precursors used for meth production and 13,000 barrels of bundled cash meant to fund cartel networks stretching from Venezuela to Central America. If it reached its destination, it could bankroll terror cells, expand operations, and destabilize entire governments across the hemisphere. The timing of the attack was critical. Satellite images had shown the vessel heading toward a refueling point near the Venezuelan coastline, escorted loosely by smaller cartel craft disguised as fishing boats. Once it docked, it would disappear into protected waters, shielded by political connections and local defenses. The window to strike was closing fast. U.S. forces decided to hit the vessel while it was isolated in international waters, where the mission could be conducted without interference. As the ship pushed through calm waters, its crew remained confident. Cartel fighters believed they had outfitted the vessel with enough anti-aircraft guns and small-caliber weapons to repel any attempt at interception. Its outer decks bristled with mounted PKMS Zu-23 autocannons and machine gun nests hidden beneath cargo tarps. They believed no country would dare challenge them in open water. But they were wrong. At that very moment, U.S. aircraft circled above undetected, drones skimmed the waves below radar, and 200 Navy SEALs silently approached underwater, preparing to rise from the sea. The stage was set for one of the most devastating interdiction missions in U.S. history. The mission codename Iron Tide. The setup for Iron Tide had been in motion long before the morning of the attack. Intelligence began weeks earlier when U.S. satellites detected unusual movements in and out of Venezuelan waters. Ships marked as commercial freighters were making irregular routes, avoiding established shipping lanes, and cutting their transponders at night. Analysts flagged one vessel in particular, a 7,000-ton cargo ship officially registered to a Panamanian shell company. To the untrained eye, it carried nothing more than stacks of containers. But closer inspection revealed reinforced hull plating, compartments modified to conceal bulk goods, and suspicious thermal signatures indicating heavy fuel storage and concealed ammunition. The Tren de Aragua cartel had transformed this freighter into a floating fortress. Hidden beneath its decks were 300 tons of methamphetamine precursors, ready to be converted into narcotics worth billions. Alongside this were 13,000 barrels of bundled cartel cash, tightly packed in steel drums, meant to finance expanded drug routes and arm loyal militias. Even more alarming, human intelligence reports confirmed that 42 civilian hostages were being held inside the ship. Some were kidnapped fishermen, others were port workers abducted to keep the operation secret. Guards forced them into labor, maintaining the vessel while cartel fighters secured the decks. From the U.S. perspective, this was more than just a drug ship. It was a hybrid threat, a combination of organized crime, terrorism financing, and maritime defiance. If allowed to reach Venezuelan ports, it would vanish under the protection of local authorities, who had repeatedly ignored cartel activity. The decision was made. The ship would not be allowed to dock. Washington approved a strike led by Navy SEALs with direct Air Force support. The staging ground was set at a U.S. base in Curaçao. From there, MQ-9 Reaper drones and EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft began surveillance flights. At sea, a disguised fishing trawler carried 200 Navy SEALs in submerged deployment pods, equipped with Mk-29 rebreathers to approach underwater. The Air Force prepared a swarm of 50 kamikaze drones, each armed with 18 pounds of C4, designed to skim the ocean surface below radar and strike critical points on the vessel. In parallel, the destroyer USS Thomas Hudner repositioned within strike range, its Aegis radar ready to monitor the skies for any unexpected interference. The plan was precise. The drones would strike first, overwhelming the ship's defenses, igniting fuel stores, and blinding its command deck. With defenses in chaos, Navy SEALs would surface and storm the hull from multiple angles, using grappling gear and breaching charges. Their mission objectives were clear: secure the hostages, eliminate resistance, and capture all financial and logistical material intact. Every step was rehearsed repeatedly. SEAL teams trained on mock-up cargo ships built in secrecy, drilling timed assaults until they could clear entire compartments in under 2 minutes. Air Force pilots ran electronic warfare simulations to jam cartel radios and block distress calls. This wasn't just another interdiction. It was a layered assault designed to crush a criminal empire's floating centerpiece in one decisive move. By the time the vessel entered the southern Caribbean, the trap was already closing. The cartel believed it was untouchable, hidden behind armed guards and political protection. But in reality, it was sailing straight into a kill box. At 10:32 a.m., from their base in Curaçao, the U.S. Air Force launched a swarm of 50 kamikaze drones programmed for precision strikes. Flying just 150 feet above the water, the drones hugged the waves, invisible to radar until they were within 2 miles of the target. On the cartel ship, guards scanned the horizon nervously, unaware that death was skimming the sea toward them. By the time lookouts spotted the incoming swarm, it was already too late. At 10:54 a.m., the first drone slammed into a portside gun nest, detonating its 18 pounds of C4 and shredding the mounted heavy machine gun. Seconds later, a second drone plunged into a stack of fuel drums, igniting a fireball that ripped across the stern. In less than 1 minute, 5 positions were gone, engulfed in smoke and flame. Cartel fighters panicked, firing blindly into the air with AK-103 rifles and PKM machine guns. But the drones were too fast and too many. Explosions thundered across the ship, ripping bulkheads apart and leaving fires burning unchecked. The strike was relentless. Within 3 minutes, 37 separate detonations had crippled the vessel's command deck and communication arrays. Radio operators tried to call for help, but Growler electronic warfare aircraft overhead jammed every frequency. The ship was deaf, blind, and cut off from the outside world. Cartel leaders shouted orders, but with fire tearing through corridors and ammunition cooking off in secondary blasts, their fighters lost discipline. Gunmen began herding hostages deeper into the ship's interior, hoping to use them as shields. The chaos worked in favor of the SEALs. At 11 a.m., the sea around the vessel came alive. From the depths, 200 Navy SEALs surfaced in coordinated waves, silent and unseen until the last moment. Using grappling hooks, ladders, and breaching tools, they boarded the burning ship from all sides. Armed with HK-416 carbines, MP-7 submachine guns, and stun grenades, the SEALs moved with brutal efficiency. The first deck was cleared in less than 2 minutes. Guards who resisted were eliminated instantly. Those who tried to hide were flushed out with flashbangs and suppressed fire. The cartel fought back, but their resistance collapsed quickly. Defensive fighters on the upper deck fired RPG-7s at random, but most shots went wide in the confusion. SEAL sharpshooters on the ship's rail picked them off one by one. Below deck, breaching charges blew open steel doors, allowing assault teams to flood into compartment after compartment. The SEALSE training showed. Every room cleared, every stairwell secured, every threat neutralized. Cartel fighters found themselves trapped in smoke-filled hallways with no escape. By 11:08 a.m., Team Bravo breached the cargo hold, where 42 hostages were chained. Guards tried to use civilians as shields, but they were taken down in less than 10 seconds with precision shots. Hostages were pulled to safety, given immediate medical aid, and moved to secure extraction points. With civilians safe, SEALs shifted focus back to eliminating cartel command. By 11:20 a.m., the ship was no longer a fortress. It was a burning tomb for the cartel's fighters. The vessel was under U.S. control. The floating empire of Tren de Aragua had lasted less than 45 minutes against the combined power of drones, SEALs, and Air Force precision. By 11:30 a.m., the operation was complete. The U.S. Navy SEALs held every corridor of the ship, while Air Force drones circled overhead to ensure no reinforcements could arrive. Fires still burned across the upper decks, but the vessel was secure, its cartel fighters either dead, captured, or scattered. In total, more than 120 cartel members were taken alive, including 9 of the group's senior commanders. Another 200 fighters lay dead on the decks or trapped in collapsed compartments. The cartel's floating fortress, once thought untouchable, had been reduced to wreckage in under 1 hour. Search teams quickly moved in to assess the cargo. Inside reinforced compartments, they uncovered over 300 tons of chemical precursors, material equal to producing 190 tons of crystal meth, a street value of more than $569 million. Hidden behind false bulkheads were $450 million in cash, bundled in plastic-wrapped bricks and marked for shipment to networks across Latin America and Africa. Alongside the drugs and cash were encrypted ledgers, sat phones, and satellite gear, linking cartel leadership directly to international trafficking and terror financing. For Washington, this was more than a drug bust. It was proof the cartel had been building a war chest on the open sea. Most critical of all, the SEALs rescued 42 hostages, civilians who had been forced to work aboard the ship under constant guard. Many were malnourished, beaten, and chained in storage compartments. Navy medics stabilized the weakest, while helicopters prepared to extract them to a medical facility in Puerto Rico. For these captives, the raid was liberation. For the cartel, it was humiliation. The strike didn't just cripple one ship, it collapsed an entire financial pipeline. Without the chemicals, without the cash, and without their leaders, the Tren de Aragua's logistics arm was shattered. Intelligence analysts estimated it would take years to rebuild the infrastructure lost in this single attack. The operation sent shockwaves across Venezuela and beyond. Cartel cells that relied on those funds suddenly found themselves cut off, scrambling for resources. Rivals saw weakness, allies saw betrayal. The myth of the floating fortress was gone. The message was unmistakable. When U.S. Special Forces and the Air Force strike together, the result isn't disruption, it's annihilation. The joint operation proved America could dismantle narco-terror operations anywhere, even in waters far from home. For other groups watching, from the Caribbean to the Pacific, the warning was brutal. Challenge America's Navy, and your empire will sink. In less than an hour, the United States had taken a cartel supership, seized $500 million in assets, freed dozens of hostages, and erased a floating command hub that had been terrorizing sea lanes. What was supposed to be a display of cartel power became one of the most decisive U.S. operations in the region in years. The Black Sea once saw battleships burned in history. The Caribbean now had its own modern legend, a cartel fortress erased by American firepower.